very much about soft furnishings, wallpaper or private telephone numbers. We will be asking about other issues you might think are interesting as well. Is this country generous enough to really help with the human catastrophe in India? Are our political leaders being fair and frank with the people of Northern Ireland, or Scotland, or Wales? For crucial elections are taking place all over, so perhaps this is a morning to sit down with a piece of toast, listen intently to the answers we hear, and then decide how to use those precious votes. And so I'm joined this morning by the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab and his Labour opposite number Lisa Nandy. I'll be talking to two Scottish leaders, Douglas Ross for the Tories and Willie Rennie for the Liberal Democrats. And ahead of the elections in Wales to Adam Price, leader of Plaid Cymru. While the pandemic here is receding, India is in a desperate state. I'll be speaking to one of the country's leading medical experts, Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, and to a government advisor here, Professor Peter Openshaw. Plus, if you're already wondering what to watch after Line of Duty, might I suggest the Nancy Mitford romp, The Pursuit of Love, brought to the screen by and starring Emily Mortimer.
Was that Linda I just saw you with?
Yes.
Oh, no, it's such a mistake to be friends with girls who are more beautiful than one is, darling. It's too dispiriting.
Reviewing the news are Deputy Political Editor Vicky Young and The Telegraph's Camilla Tominey. But before all of that, the news headlines with Seema Katecha.
Good morning, Andrew. People may not need to self-isolate if they've been in close contact with somebody who tests positive for coronavirus if a new trial is successful. The scheme, which begins next week in England, will ask people to take a test every morning for 7 days. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says it will allow people to carry on working, but some scientists have questioned the accuracy of lateral flow tests. 5,000 people will attend a music festival in Liverpool today as part of the government's pilot scheme for live events. Crowds will gather to watch headline act Blossoms in Sefton Park without having to social distance or wear face masks. Scientists will be monitoring the gig, and those with a ticket will have to provide a negative COVID test to get in. India continues to struggle through a second COVID wave as the country reported its highest daily death toll on Saturday, with around 3,700 people dying from the virus. Meanwhile, votes are being counted in 5 Indian states where elections were held last month. The campaign for the polls has been blamed for spreading the coronavirus. The lockdown in the Delhi region has been extended for another week. A national day of mourning is taking place in Israel following Friday's deadly crush at a Jewish pilgrimage. 45 men and boys died after being trapped in a narrow walkway during the festival, attended by up to 100,000 mostly ultra-Orthodox Jews. Questions have been raised about the management of crowds at the festival. That's all from me. The next news is on BBC One at 1. Back to you, Andrew.
Seema, many thanks for that. Now, the papers. Nobody is actually declaring victory in the war on coronavirus in Britain, but there's a real sense on the front pages of an important corner having been turned. There's the Sunday Express. End of the nightmare. There is a question mark there. The Mail on Sunday. 3 giant steps back to normal life. The Observer has an interesting front page. 2 pandemics. As we ease up, virus sweeps the planet's poor. So that's both sides of it. And the Sunday Times, NHS draws up the vaccine plan for school children. We'll be talking more about that. Other stories around would include the big argument coming in Scotland next. There's the Sunday Telegraph. Billions for Scots as Prime Minister plans to save the Union. That is details of Boris Johnson's ideas for trying to fend off the SNP, whether they work or not. Then there's the Sunday Mirror, still very, very interested in Sofagate. Boris's 58k wallpaper boss is a Tory donor, it says. And The Sun has a story about a couple breaking into part of the estate at Windsor. So lots and lots to talk about there. But I think we will start with the obvious place, Vicky, which is the coronavirus story and declaring victory there. Holidays are back, and we're going to hear later this week which countries are on the green, amber and red lists.
Yeah, this traffic light list now, it's not going to be simple. We all remember from before, don't we, about those travel corridors, people dashing back, trying to beat the shutdown. Well, this plan is for 3 different types of countries. So they will tell us, hopefully later this week, which ones will be on that first list. Now, speculation that Malta, maybe Portugal might be on the green list. The important thing is what colour it is depends on what you have to do when you come back to this country. So that's about quarantine, it's about testing. But even with green, there won't be any quarantine on your return, but you will have to get still 2 tests. And of course, lots of people saying that the cost of those tests, especially for larger families, is going to be potentially a bit of a problem. And then you'll have obviously the amber ones where there's 10 days quarantine, and then red, which is the hotels that you have to go into. So people can start to be optimistic maybe, but I think what it's going to be is for the government is to try and get this message across to people about exactly what's going to be expected of them.
I suspect Friday might be a rather busy day for travel agents. We'll see. Camilla, the other big story, of course, related to that is this idea of moving away from 10-day self-isolation to tests. But these lateral flow tests are not universally admired, are they?
No, they're not, Andrew. And the idea is that instead of isolating for 10 days, you would take a lateral flow test every morning to guarantee that you're safe that day. But of course, there are scientists who are worried about not only false positives, but also false negatives. And equally, I think the government's own researchers found that when they are carried out by professionals, nurses and doctors, they have a high efficacy. But when it comes down to ordinary members of the public like you and I, we're perhaps not quite as good as administering the test on ourselves and getting the right result.
Well, that's a decision we don't know the answer to yet, I suppose. But there's another idea of drawing up plans for vaccinating school children, the Sunday Times is talking about, which to some of us might seem a bit weird because school children are not falling seriously ill with COVID. They're not going to hospital. But presumably this is because they are or may well be passing it around.
Yeah, that's right. And people have been talking a lot at the beginning of this pandemic about herd immunity. And that's involving protecting as many people as you can. You have to reach a certain threshold. Now, particularly older teenagers, the response from them is much more like an adult. So I think that's the plan. Some of the jabs, Pfizer particularly, have started to do the trials on whether it's OK for children. The possibility, of course, is there is a single jab possibility for children. So this may be a plan. And obviously building on the success that there's been for everybody else, they maybe want to roll this out, obviously, much quicker, maybe come September.
Right, the Prime Minister, his wallpaper, the donors and all of that. Camilla Tominey, there's a very, very brightly coloured and rather lurid 2-page spread in the Sunday Times about this. I think what a lot of people are asking themselves is, how serious is this? Will he actually be brought down by it? If the Electoral Commission finds that he's done something wrong, what happens next?
Well, he is subject, I think, now to 3 different investigations. The Sunday Times has not only looked at the background to, in fact, Boris Johnson's money problems, which viewers might find slightly odd, considering he earns, I think, 157 grand a year. But this sense that he's never been very good at managing money. There's some anecdotal suggestion that donors might have been asked to stump up the bill for Wilfred, their young baby's nannying bill. Equally, there's talk of how Boris Johnson in the past forgot to pay bills or would put down money at a restaurant table but not wait for the change. It has been suggested, though, that it perhaps strikes some people as odd that he gets paid less for being Prime Minister than he did for being a columnist on my newspaper, The Telegraph. And it makes the point that Joe Biden earns 260 grand a year. And I think somebody like Ursula von der Leyen, again, nearly doubles the Prime Minister's salary. So this issue rumbles on, but I think it may have got to kind of peak silly because equally the Sunday Times has got a nice little comment piece from Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen commenting on the wallpaper. So perhaps we are at the end of this story now.
Peak silly, as you will. We won't go into the details of whether people in the Telegraph group are overpaid, Camilla, right at the moment.
Or at the BBC, Andrew, actually.
Or at the BBC or anywhere else. Indeed. Vicky's keeping out of this. But our colleague, Laura Kunsberg, the political editor, has written quite a stinging piece for the BBC website about Boris Johnson, the truth and history.
Yeah, and this is because this isn't just about wallpaper. There's various elements to this. One is, of course, transparency, that we, the public, the voters, should know if ministers, if politicians, if prime ministers, if they are receiving donations. We don't know if that's the case yet. We need to know because we need to know who they might be beholden to. But it goes wider than that. And I think the point about Laura's piece is it's looking back over Boris Johnson, the politician, you know, about how at times he's refused to give full explanations for things. Questions about his conduct and character really have followed him throughout his entire career. She's got a nice little piece there about the fact that he's nicknamed the trolley because people in the room think he's made a decision and then he veers off in another directions. But I guess there's a difference maybe between not answering questions about your personal life, maybe even financial matters, and politics. Now, his friends say when it comes to politics that he is honest about all of this. But there's a quote from a former minister saying, facts, policies, people, they all get ditched if they get in the way.
Goodness me, that is strong stuff. Now, there's a sort of Westminster received wisdom, Camilla, which is almost always slightly wrong or behind the scenes. And over the last few days, it was that this whole sleaze attack, wallpaper gate and the rest of it wasn't really, as they say, cutting through to voters. Voters don't care, and Labour has made a big mistake about going on about it. And yet, in the papers today, not one but two polls suggest that it might well be having some effect.
Yeah, I think the polling last week was suggesting that the Tories are on 44% and Labour on 33%. But this opinion poll in The Observer is saying actually the Tories are now on 42% and Labour on 37%. So they've lost some of that advantage. Equally, there's a nice anecdotal story. They've gone up to Dudley. They've spoken to some Red Wall voters. And interestingly, picking up on the Laura Kay blog there, I think sometimes people's expectations of Johnson are so low that these sorts of things don't really change the dial. But at the same time, there is a problem with Sir Keir Starmer. The newspaper's spoken to some students outside Dudley College who literally didn't know who he was. So this idea that the Labour leader isn't managing to cut through to these so-called former Red Wall seats, I think is going to be worrying for the opposition.
Absolutely. And Vicky, there's another poll to the same effect in the Sunday Times. But let's turn, if we might, to what may well be Mr Johnson's next big political problem, which is Scotland, because the SNP, according to polling there, is running very close to winning an overall majority, perhaps by one seat or so. But with Alaba, the new party run by Alex Salmond, or led by Alex Salmond, and the Scottish Greens, which are in favour of independence as well, there may well be a so-called supermajority, or at least a clear majority, in the new Scottish Parliament for a new independence referendum. And the Sunday Telegraph has a story about how he is going to respond. But just talk us through the nature of that challenge.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing, isn't it? Is if the SNP end up with a fourth term and, as you say, that outright majority, even a slender one, it begins, of course, to raise that question again about another independence referendum and how both sides respond in all of that. Now, definitely the UK government, a lot of people would say, have left it rather late to start to be serious about this. And there's talk of a meeting to get together. What are they going to do? What is the UK government going to do about all of this, beyond putting the union flag on everything, which is certainly one of the ideas.
But not a very big idea.
It comes down to, money, according to one of the papers here, talking about billions going to better rail, better road, even saying about treating Scottish patients in English hospitals, making the connections more in a way.
Well, this billions for Scots story is the Sunday Telegraph splash today, Camilla. Now, looking at all the things that Boris Johnson and his ministers have said about Scotland over the years, are we finally seeing the beginnings of a real strategy here, do you think?
Well, one would hope so, and not just in Downing Street itself, but a number of Tory MPs are extremely concerned about the union issue. That polling seems to suggest that if Nicola Sturgeon only gets, say, a one-seat majority, that might be able to put kind of minds at rest down in Westminster that it isn't as urgent as it seems. But I think the main problem is trying to avert some kind of legal challenge where the SNP can come up with an independence referendum even without Westminster's say-so. I think that's the biggest concern at the moment.
That's certainly possible. Vicky, let's turn to the other huge story around the world, which is India. Now, the Observer has a very good front page there, I think, where it contrasts what's happening in Britain and other Western countries with what's happening in India and other parts of the poorer parts of the world.
Yeah, and I think that's the point, isn't it? Here in the UK, we are beginning to feel optimistic, things opening up, the number of cases dropping dramatically, that vaccine rollout, is absolutely having the effect that they want. But making the point here in the Observer that actually in other parts of the world, India, South America, Africa, actually the problem is extremely dire. Now, they're making the connection with a cut in overseas aid that the UK government has decided upon, saying it's actually the time when it's needed more than ever, that needs to happen. And plus, of course, vaccines, the export of vaccines. And they're making the point that, no one is going to be safe until the whole world is safe. So even though we might be beginning to feel optimistic about the next few months and the end being in sight, it just isn't the case in many of these other countries.
That is certainly what the scientists are saying too. Vicky, Camilla, thanks both very much indeed for that. Now then, I was thinking, what are the phrases that these days make people genuinely proud to be British? Chicken tikka masala, John Lewis, AC12, Hugh Edwards, but above all, bank holiday washout. So, how patriotic is Ben Rich feeling in the weather studio this morning, Ben?
Very patriotic, if that's what you're looking for, Andrew, because, yes, there is some rain on the way and plenty of it for this bank holiday Monday. Today, it's a sunshine and showers day, but some of the showers are heavy and are already bringing some hail. The showers are already developing across parts of northwest England. Reports of a hail shower there in the Lake District. You can see these lumpy shower clouds that have worked in from the Irish Sea. Also a few showers at the moment in northeast Scotland. We've had one or two to the far southeast, but those showers will break out quite widely through the afternoon. Some heavy, some with hail and thunder, but always with some sunny spells in between. And as always in these scenarios, there will be places that avoid all the showers and stay completely dry. Temperatures of 8 to 14 degrees. No great shakes for this time of year. The showers fade through tonight. Some clear skies for a time, but then you can see cloud gathering out west. Some outbreaks of rain getting into Northern Ireland by the end of the night. Not such a cold night for most of us tonight, although we will see a touch of frost once again across parts of Scotland. And then tomorrow, here comes our bank holiday washout. Some heavy rain pushing in from the west. Some very strong winds as well. There will be gales for some western and southern coasts. Gusts of 60 miles per hour or more in the most exposed places. And feeling really disappointing with top temperatures between 7 and 12 degrees. Andrew.
A prickle of patriotic pride. Now then, as we've discussed already today, Scotland goes to the polls on Thursday for a momentous election that may change the future of the United Kingdom. Douglas Ross, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, wants to stop another independence referendum, and he joins me now from Glasgow. Mr Ross, welcome. Before we get to that, can I ask you something about what you've said about Nicola Sturgeon? You said that she had broken the ministerial code and should therefore resign. I take it from that you believe that if it turns out that Boris Johnson has broken the ministerial code, he should resign.
Well, Nicola Sturgeon was found to have misled MSPs in Parliament by a cross-party committee of MSPs. But I think, as your earlier commentator said, there are currently 3 investigations underway in terms of what the Prime Minister has done and issues around that. And I think it's right that we look to have serious questions answered on all of those points.
I'm just making the point. If he is found to have broken the ministerial code, and I'm using my words carefully, if he is found to have broken that code, should he resign, yes or no?
Of course. I think people expect the highest standards of those in the highest office of the land, and that's why I think people are looking at the investigations that are currently ongoing and waiting for the answers to be heard.
Very interesting. Has Brexit been good for Scotland?
I think Brexit has allowed us the opportunity here in Scotland to now have more than 2.8 million people vaccinated. Our outstanding NHS staff, British Armed Forces and volunteers have got these vital jabs in the arms at a far faster rate than clearly anywhere else in the European Union. I think people do see that as our way out of this pandemic and it gives us a lot more hope and optimism.
That's a fair point. Has Brexit been good for the Scottish economy?
Well, we have certainly seen the biggest risk to the Scottish economy is another Scottish independence referendum, because Nicola Sturgeon has been unable. Well, I was just saying Nicola Sturgeon has been unable to tell us what the Scottish currency would be, what the border would be between Scotland and England. We do 60% of our trade with the rest of the United Kingdom, which is why it's so important we remain a strong, integral part of the United Kingdom. And all that is at risk in this election, with the SNP, by the current polls, on course to get a majority. But there's a way to stop that, and that's by voting Scottish Conservatives.
It depends how closely you listen to the Scottish Conservatives, doesn't it? Because in January you said the post-Brexit trade deal presents, and I quote, a sea of opportunity for Scottish fishermen. What's happened to Scottish fishermen since then?
Well, there's undoubtedly been serious challenges and I think both the Scottish and the UK governments continue to try and resolve the issues with the added bureaucracy and the delays getting our excellent products out to the European Union. But I've been speaking to fishermen throughout this campaign, and there have been improvements since January, but there's still some way to go. It's
a bit more than serious problems. The Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation says that Scottish salmon farmers have incurred losses of at least £11 million, quotes, as a direct result of the changes brought about by Brexit.
Yes, and we are trying to resolve these issues. It's absolutely right that we listen to the Scottish Salmon Producers Association, the Whitefish Association, the Scottish Fishermen's Federation. You know, I'm working with all of these organisations to resolve the issues that are currently facing the industry. But we know there are better times ahead as more and more quota comes back to Scottish and UK fishermen rather than being tied into the hated common fisheries policy.
If the SNP, alongside with Alaba and the Greens, win a majority in the Scottish Parliament, do they have a mandate for another referendum?
Well, I want to stop that. I want to stop that SNP majority. These polls are on a knife edge right now, and people know there's a tried and tested way to stop that. 5 years ago, pro-UK voters, anti-referendum voters united behind the Scottish Conservatives, and we're asking them to do the same at this crucial election, to stop that division, to stop going back to the old arguments and focus on Scotland's recovery, because that's the priority for people here right now.
I understand that's what you want. Nonetheless, the polls are pretty clear that the Unionists will not have a majority in this new Parliament. And I ask you again, if the pro-independence side of the argument, which involves the Greens and Alaba, as well as the SNP, if they win a majority, as seems very likely, do they have a mandate to call for another referendum?
Andrew, I'm a proud unionist. I never want another independence referendum separating families, businesses and communities all over again. And there's a way to stop that. And we can stop that by pro-UK voters backing the Scottish Conservatives, particularly on their party list vote on the Peach ballot paper.
Let me just ask you for a moment to address directly proud nationalists. What is their democratic route to independence? If you won't have a referendum and you say this election shouldn't give them a mandate, what is their possible democratic route to getting what they want?
Well, I've spoken to nationalists in this campaign when we've been out and about across Scotland. People in favour of a second independence referendum are not in favour on Nicola Sturgeon's timescale. The fact that we could potentially have another referendum within the next couple of years. Nicola Sturgeon has said she'd be campaigning for that during our recovery. So even pro-independence supporters are saying we cannot risk our recovery and put our rebuilding efforts on the line while the nationalists take us through another damaging, divisive independence referendum.
Some may be saying that, but you're still not answering my question, which is a straightforward question. What is their democratic ballot box route to independence?
Well, there is an opportunity at this election to focus on recovery, to focus on rebuilding.
I'm sorry, Douglas Ross, that is not an answer. I'm asking you what is the route, the democratic route to independence.
And I don't think anyone would expect the leader of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party to be suggesting that we should have another independence referendum. I don't want that. I want to focus on education, raising our educational standards that have plummeted over the SNP's 14 years in power. I want to invest more in the NHS. I want to support businesses and protect jobs. That's what we can do at this election if we get rid of the threat of another independence referendum.
Let me ask you an equine question. Boris Johnson said that wild horses wouldn't stop him coming to Scotland during this election. Where is he?
Well, the Prime Minister knows I'm leading the party here in Scotland. It's the Scottish Conservative and Unionist candidates that are on the ballot paper, not the Prime Minister, and it's our manifesto that's going forward to the people of Scotland in just a few days' time.
The Prime Minister seems to be able to get up around and about pretty easily. He's been to Hartlepool, he's been to Wolverhampton, he's been to Wrexham in Wales, but he hasn't been to Scotland. The wild horses are winning as far as he's concerned. Can I put it to you, the reason that he hasn't been to Scotland is you don't want him in Scotland because you think he's a liability there.
No, the reason he's not been to Scotland is because I'm leading the campaign here in Scotland. I'm the one taking the fight to the SNP to try and get the next Scottish Parliament laser focused on our recovery and rebuilding, to try and ensure that we see the investment in our NHS, in our police service, in our education systems, all these things that are under threat at the moment. We can actually have a Parliament focused on these issues if we can stop a second SNP majority and a second independence referendum.
Let's see what happens. Douglas Ross, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. And now I'm going to be talking to Willie Rennie, who is leader of the Liberal Democrats in Scotland, in the last of the Scottish leader interviews ahead of these elections. Very, very important elections. Willie Rennie, thanks for joining us. You have said that you think there should never be another independence referendum. So I ask you again, your party has the word Democrat in its title. For a Democrat who wants an independent Scotland, what are they supposed to do? What is the democratic road through?
Well, I think it's very democratic that if I stand on a platform in an election campaign and say I don't want another independence referendum, that's exactly how I should vote, because that's what the people have voted for me for. That's the essence of democracy. It would be bizarre if I did the opposite, so I'm not going to support it. And the reason why I don't support another independence referendum, because we saw what it was like last time. The divisions within society were deep,
why you don't want
and I don't want it again.
I understand why you don't want it. I'm just trying to work out what might happen next. It follows from what you've just said about being a Democrat that if the SNP, aided by the Greens and ALBA, win a majority in this Parliament, they have a democratic right to implement what they have all said they want to do, which is another independence referendum. If they win, they have that right, don't they?
Isn't it a depressing prospect that we've got the various factions of the nationalist movement arguing about the result of the election, which hasn't even happened yet? Let's focus on actually what this election is about. And this is about whether we have a parliament that's focused on independence, as they would want, or whether we want a parliament that's focused on recovery. And this is important, Andrew, because I have got thousands of people who are waiting over a year for mental health treatment. We've got record high drug deaths in Scotland, the highest for 6 years in a row. Across Europe, it's the highest. Now, I'm not going to stand by and have another debate on independence while my constituents are suffering. So that's why I'm against another independence referendum. I know you love to talk about the hypothetical situations upon hypothetical, but forgive me, I am going to... No, it is. I'm going to focus on the issues that affect my constituents. The fact that Scottish education, which used to be one of the best in the world, is no longer that. People have lost out on massive opportunities. So let's focus on that, Andrew.
Well, let's focus on another big issue for your party. You are always the pro-EU party. You are the party for Europhiles. And now you have ditched, as a party, that policy. You're no longer in favour of rejoining the EU. If you are a pro-European, pro-EU Scot right now who wants to be back inside the EU, the answer is don't vote Liberal Democrat anymore, vote SNP.
I don't think the nationalists have learned one single lesson from the Brexit experience. Not one single one. We had divisions right across the country. We've seen problems with businesses trading across the European Union. We've seen the issues in Northern Ireland, and they've looked at that and they said, yeah, we want more of that. No, I think we should put the divisions of the past behind us. Of course, I want to join the European Union. I want to be a member. We were the leading party across the United Kingdom against Brexit. We campaigned every single step of the way. But I accept that for the next 5 years, we should focus on recovery. I accept that.
You're the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats, but the leader of the UK Liberal Democrats, Ed Davey, has been absolutely clear. He says, quotes, we are not a rejoined party. So which is it?
Well, if you look at actually the debate that we had at conference, it was crystal clear. We want to join the European Union. We're very clear about that.
I'm sorry.
And we have to persuade people... No, you have to follow the conference.
I'm sorry, but Ed Davey, on the 30th of January 2020, and then again this year, said, first of all, our campaign to stop Brexit is over. And then he said, we are not a rejoined party. Yes, he is leader of the Liberal Democrats. Which is it?
But you need to be clear. You need to look at what the party's policy actually is. And the party's policy is clear. We want to persuade people over a period of time to join the European Union. We want to make sure we keep close, of course, in the meantime, so that we have good trading relationships, so that people have the opportunities that we previously had with the European Union. But for now, for the next 5 years, I absolutely agree with Ed Davey. We need to focus on the recovery, because thousands of people are on the verge of losing their job. That should be the priority for the next 5 years.
So that is why you didn't mention it in your conference speech. That is why you did not mention it in your conference speech at all.
I talk about Europe a lot, Andrew. I think you'll find that I am a dedicated European. But the most important thing for the next 5 years is we put recovery first and the divisions of independence behind us.
Willie Rennie in Edinburgh, thanks very much indeed for joining us this morning. India, as we've heard, is in a desperate state during its latest coronavirus surge. It has reported more than 400,000 new coronavirus cases yesterday alone. And efforts to vaccinate as many people as possible are being hampered by a shortage of vaccine supply. I spoke earlier this morning to Dr. Rajiv Ranjan, who is Chief Advisor to the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, and I asked him what it's like where he is in Delhi.
At least every family there is someone, or in the distant relation there is someone who is affected with COVID, and you have your you get the news of someone maybe a very high profile personality or someone or near and dear ones dying of this COVID every day. So that's really very painful.
So as a doctor, what's it actually like inside Indian hospitals at the moment?
Look, Indian doctors are now has been put on the war, and we have been, working with whatever armaments we have right now. We are really sort of the infrastructure right now, and as you see that the Indian health scenario is not good because Indian government used to spend very few percentage of their GDPs in the health sector, though they have increased this year. But assuming there's such a vast tract India and enormous population of 1.4 billion, this much of amount of money is not sufficient to cater to the entire of the Indian 1.4 billion population.
And how far away from the peak do you think you are?
In a week or so, we may reach peak, because yesterday only Dr. Fauci, who is the medical advisor to President Biden, he has said that India needs a complete lockdown for 15 days to contain this, to break this transmission chain. And I think hopefully Indian government might be looking for that.
So in specific terms, is it oxygen? Is it vaccines? What exactly does India need now?
Look, as everybody in the world knows that we are the largest vaccine producer country in the world. But the thing is that we are a population of 1.4 billion, and for vaccinating, from yesterday only we had started the third phase of vaccination, and we have already crossed around more than 15 crore vaccination right now. So and since yesterday we have started vaccinating 18 plus year age old. So vaccination is right now is the main armament which will save you from the severity of the disease. Though many of the persons who have already vaccinated, they are also contacting the disease, but the severity is quite less in them. So the death rates are very negligible or not at all in them. So our focus and Indian government's focus is to get maximum people vaccinated as soon as possible.
Dr. Ranjan, thanks very much indeed for talking to us, and good luck. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well, listening to that is Professor Peter Openshaw, Professor of Experimental Medicine at Imperial College London. He advises the British government as a member of NERVTAG. Professor Openshaw, thanks very much. You were listening to Dr. Ranjan there saying that vaccines are the absolute front line for India at the moment in this ghastly situation they're in. Given what's happening in India and other parts of the world, do you think it's right that we carry on vaccinating young people who are, frankly, at very little risk of hospitalisation, rather than send those vaccines to India?
Well, Andrew, there's a lot in that question. I think first thing to say is that vaccines are but one of the tools in our toolbox against this pandemic, and that it's absolutely vital that we don't think that there's just one thing which is going to save us all. We really do know that that lockdown works, and that public events, mass events, will feed the spread of the virus, and that we mustn't take our concentration off that and think that just by vaccinating we're going to be out of this situation. With regard to vaccine equity, we've in this country ordered at least twice as much vaccine as we could possibly use. That doesn't mean to say we've actually got it in the storehouses ready to go out, but certainly we could be donating something over 120 million doses, but probably best through the WHO COVAX system, which ensures equitable distribution. There are well-established ways of doing this, and rather than doing a sort of public demonstration of generosity to a particular country, it really should be through the WHO, through this well-organized system.
I'm just really interested in what is clearly a very, very difficult public policy issue, because if we are going to release vaccines now when they're needed for India and other countries, but particularly India, then we would have to slow down or pause our vaccination programme here. And that is the real choice, and that's the very difficult thing, which I'm very interested in your views on. Professor Andrew Pollard, who runs the Oxford Vaccine Group, says that if we continue to focus on vaccinating younger and younger age groups in the high-income countries, where there are many thousands of people dying, when there are many thousands of people dying who are not getting the vaccine, I don't think that's a situation that's acceptable.
Well, I would absolutely agree with Andrew Pollard. There has to be equitable distribution of vaccines, and wealthy countries have actually pre-purchased a lot of vaccine, which has ranked up the amount of vaccine which is available globally and which should be a global benefit. And as the WHO and many others have said many times, we're not safe until everyone is safe. So global equitable distribution is absolutely vital. And I think everyone acknowledges that. It's a matter of balancing what we have available to our own population with what we can distribute equitably around the world, through these well-organized systems that are in place.
India is the world's largest producer of vaccine, and we get a lot of vaccines from India, and we're waiting for another 5 million doses at the moment. At the very least, do you think we should say we're not going to take the vaccines away from India while this situation is so serious there?
That would seem a very reasonable arrangement to come to, but it has to be negotiated properly with the people who are keeping an eye on all the vaccine supplies. I think we mustn't forget just how amazing it is that we're in the situation of having a whole set of vaccines to choose from, many of which are very, very strongly protective, not only against disease, but also against transmission.
Do you think that we should be looking at vaccinating children, as is being suggested in the papers today?
Well, that's a very interesting one. And I think with some of the more transmissible variants, it does seem that children may be playing a bit more of a role in spreading the virus. And they may do so innocently without knowing that they are infected. So there is an argument for spreading vaccines into younger age groups, in part to try and reduce transmission when schools go back in the autumn, particularly.
Professor, you sound not nervous, but properly cautious. Are we still on course to open up on the 21st of June, as ministers say?
I think we are on course at the moment, but we have to just keep an eye on what's going on in terms of case numbers and in terms of the new variants that will be arising internally, but also coming into the country. It's inevitable that those variants will be on our shores or be expanding in some areas. We just need to be very cautious, and we need to use this time to prepare, particularly for what may happen in the autumn when we go back to school and where there may be more transmission. So this is the time to prepare. And to,
my viewers may be wondering, are we going to be able to start to go on holiday in 2 weeks' time? What does the professor say about that?
Yes, within limits. It is so important that we do not drop our guard completely. We know that it's perfectly likely that there will be further outbreaks unless we use this time to be very cautious and to behave sensibly.
Is it secure enough? Is it safe enough to replace self-isolation, the 10-day self-isolation, with lateral flow tests, do you think?
Well, this is a very contentious point. There are people who think that the lateral flow tests are going to be extremely useful, and there are those who think that the accuracy, the sensitivity and specificity of these tests are so low that there's going to be an awful lot of false positives. I'm sure lateral flow tests do have a place. And if you test repeatedly, I think you will find people who are going to be most prone to spreading disease. So these are important studies to do, important experiments to do, in order to work out exactly what the role of the lateral flow tests is.
So that sounds like it might be a bit too early to do that. Professor, we've been speaking now together for more than a year about this. If I said, is it time to declare victory inside Britain over coronavirus, would you say, no, hold on, Andrew, it's too early?
I would absolutely say it's too early to declare victory and to drop our guard. We do know that this infection has a tendency to come back again, and we need to use this time to be absolutely sure that we've got every precaution in place to stop further outbreaks.
Professor Peter Openshaw, thanks very much indeed for talking to us again this morning. Thank you. And I'm joined now from Salford by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Lisa Nandy. Lisa Nandy, a big political and moral choice. Should we pause or halt the vaccination of young people in Britain who are under very, very little risk of hospitalisation from coronavirus in order to release vaccines for people who would otherwise die in India?
Well, we've made really good progress with the vaccination scheme here. It's been an amazing rollout, but we're not done yet. And I think you just heard from Professor Openshaw that we need to not to let our guard down. We haven't defeated this virus in Britain yet, and we need to keep up the momentum with that vaccination programme. This is a question that is really personal to me. I just found out last night that a close family member in India is in hospital with COVID, and I've got family members here in the UK who are deeply affected by COVID as well. My answer to that, Andrew, would be let's not pit the people of Britain against the people of India. We need to keep up the progress that we've made with rolling out the vaccination programme here, and we need to dramatically ramp up supply and manufacturing across the world. That's not just the case in India, although India is a particular issue for the world because of the size and severity of what we're seeing. It's also the case in other countries, in the global south, in the refugee camps, and that's why I completely support what Professor Openshaw was saying. We need a global agreement in order to make sure that we get on the front foot about this and get the vaccination to every corner of the globe.
I'm sorry to hear about your family, but that's not quite an answer to the really difficult question, which is, do we pause vaccinations here for young people who are not going to be hospitalised or become seriously ill in order to release vaccines into India? Professor Openshaw also said he thought we could release 120 million vaccines in due course for India. And, you know, given our success, shouldn't we be doing that?
So to answer your question directly, no, I don't think that we should pause the vaccination programme here. I think nowhere is safe until everywhere is safe, but that includes the United Kingdom as well. He's right, though, to say that the UK has ordered more vaccinations than we need, and there will be surplus doses that we can make available to India in due course. We should obviously try and do that as soon as possible. The United States, for example, has just identified 60 million doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine that they believe could be made available to the rest of the world, including India, and we should do that through a global agreement. We are the hosts of the G7 this year, and we should step up, show leadership and press ahead with that global agreement to address every aspect of the barriers to getting the vaccine out that currently exists.
The crucial thing in what you just said there is the future tense. There will be surplus doses, but we both know that India needs the vaccines right now. At the very least, there are 5 million or more vaccines on order from India, still in India from the factory. At the very least, should we leave those vaccines in India, as Professor Openshaw suggested, to help people there, rather than bring them home here?
Well, as I understand it, the Indian government hasn't yet requested that we do that. I think he's right to say that there ought to be a negotiation about how quickly we can make sure that we get vaccines to people in other parts of the world that are experiencing crises, because if we don't, this will also come back to us here in the UK, as well as being a huge moral question about the support that we provide to countries like India, who have been great friends to us, who made the paracetamol exports available to us very quickly when we requested it a year ago, when we were in our own crisis.
Perhaps we should be doing something as generous for them now.
Well, I think we could be doing far, far more. We certainly could be providing more of the equipment that is needed. We're world experts in genomic sequencing. We can track and map this virus. We should be making that capacity available to India. It will help them right now, but it will also help us. So absolutely, we should step up and do more.
Do you think we are now on course for the end of all legal restrictions on June the 21st?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I think it depends how the next few months play out. I think it depends whether people can continue to be cautious, to follow the rules. The evidence I've seen so far is that people are, despite a few well-documented cases in the papers and on social media of people going absolutely crazy once we were allowed back to the pubs. Most people, I think, have been quite careful, and I would just urge people to do that. This has got to be the last lockdown. We can't have more of this.
So 17th of May, in less than 3 weeks' time, people are supposed to be able to go on holiday. Are you happy for that to happen?
Well, if the scientists think that it's safe, then yes, of course, we would support that.
Well, the scientists say it is safe, so it's a political question, really.
Yeah, and we're very much with the government on this. That, you know, once we can start getting back to normal, if the scientists say it's safe to do so, we should do so. I guess I would just sound a note of caution to people that although we may be able to travel again, and as the first ever Shadow Foreign Secretary never to leave Wigan, I'm quite looking forward to being able to go on a few trips. But The truth is that it's going to be quite complicated for a long time. The government is saying that the rules can change at fairly short notice. You may be required to quarantine. You may have to shell out large sums of money for hotel bills as a consequence. So I think people need to be careful about this, need to do the research. I certainly haven't booked a foreign holiday for this summer. I won't be taking one at the moment. I think, especially given what we've just been talking about in India, I think there is reason to proceed, but to proceed with caution.
Do you think that moving from the mandatory 10 days of isolation to lateral flow tests is something that should happen?
I think the evidence is mixed about how well the lateral flow tests can pick up the virus. They're obviously a helpful tool in terms of helping us to be able to unlock more quickly. But I defer to Professor Openshaw on that question.
If you have a bad or disappointing day on Thursday in these local elections, how much do you think that's because your leader has been doing photo opportunities around wallpaper stalls rather than talking to people about what really matters to them?
Well, look, I don't think it's anything to do with that. That was a light-hearted moment on what has been a gruelling campaign. Unlike Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer has been out around the country, talking to people, listening to people, fighting for every vote and not taking them for granted.
So has Boris Johnson. He's been out around most of the country very vigorously.
Well, you've just been asking Douglas Ross why he wasn't in Scotland. We're not shying away from the electorate in this campaign because we know we've got to earn back people's trust. I think things are shifting, if I'm honest. I can feel the mood shifting slightly. It doesn't certainly feel like December 2019, which was the worst election I can remember having to fight. This election, it feels like people have realised that Labour is under new management. They are angry with a Tory government that believes the rules aren't for them. But whether these were always going to be difficult elections for us, we're not expecting miracles on Thursday night, but we're going to carry on making the case.
Let's talk, if we might, about policy. Sure. The Royal College of Nursing wants a 12% increase. What do you think they should get?
Well, look,
I'm asking for a clear answer.
Yeah, well, at the very minimum, they should get what they were promised. They were promised a real terms pay rise. We think the government ought to honour that. Yeah, and that was written into legislation. The government wanted to make such a big deal about the fact that they had the backs of people who have kept us going in this pandemic, that they legislated for it, and then they broke that promise.
Maybe this is why some of your voters feel that under new management, Labour isn't really on their sides. John McDonnell, Diane Abbott, Rebecca Long-Bailey have all been able to say, yes, nurses deserve their 12% pay rise, but as Shadow Foreign Secretary, you can't agree with them.
Well, there's different views in the nursing profession. What we believe is that nurses should get two things. First of all, what they're owed and anything extra that the government is prepared to negotiate with them in order to raise nurses' pay after what has been a very, very difficult year. But we also believe that there should be... We also believe that they should have what nurses in my constituency, when I met with them a few weeks ago, asked me for, which is the tools to do the job. They've had 11 years of underfunding to the National Health Service. The recent rises don't make up in any way for the amount of money that has been taken out of the National Health Service, and they are going to work without the ability to do the jobs that they want to do. Unlike this Tory government.
All right, Lisa Nandy, thanks for talking to us this morning. Wales also goes to the polls on Thursday, and I've been speaking to some of the party leaders there. And I'm joined this morning by a man hoping to put independence at the heart of the final days of the election debate, Plaid Cymru's leader, Adam Price. Adam Price, welcome. Can you be straight with Welsh voters and agree that if Wales leaves the UK and joins the EU, that means there has to be a border going down between Wales and England because of the EU single market? That has to happen, doesn't it? Adam Price, can you hear me? Asking my intelligent questions? I'm afraid you can't. All right, we're going to go and talk to Emily Mortimer now, the actor and writer Emily Mortimer. She has fulfilled a lifelong ambition in bringing to the screen an adaptation of Nancy Mitford's classic novel, The Pursuit of Love. She's directed it with a glittering cast that includes Dominic West, Lily James, Andrew Scott. It starts next Sunday night at 9 o'clock. Earlier, Emily Mortimer told me how she worried at one stage if the world really needed, in her words, another bit of poshness on our screens.
Linda believes in love. She's passionately romantic.
Here's Fanny.
Is life only about love?
Yes.
Relax, all discipline. I could easily come to nothing.
So you aspire to being wicked and adulterous, do you, Linda?
No. I aspire to true love.
Love is for grown-ups, as you'll discover one day.
Come fight the fascists with me.
Better get dressed first.
I read the book again. You know, when I was asked if I might be interested in adapting it, I knew that I had always loved Nancy Mitford. I had read all the books when I was younger, but yes, my first thought was, oh yes, I'd like an excuse to read that book again. But my second thought was, oh yes, do we really all need this now? And then I read it again, and I realized on reading it that it's actually so radical the way that she writes about so many things, including what it is to be a woman, or what it was to be a woman then anyway. And it feels incredibly alive, and it really spoke to me, and it feels kind of fearless and brave the way she writes, as well as just extremely entertaining. Is that Linda I just saw you with?
Yes.
Oh no, it's such a mistake to be friends with girls who are more beautiful than one is, darling. It's too dispiriting. Who was she with?
Tony Krosick.
Tony? Oh, that won't last.
This is a colourful adaptation, Emily, but you haven't really modernised it in the sense it stays close to the tone of the original novel.
When I first was adapting it, I thought, oh, it's a Brexit story. And then COVID struck. Life felt very fragile. And then the question became, what's the best way to approach life while we have it? Is it to just hurl yourself headlong at it and live, for the moment?
An adulterous woman is the single most disgusting thing there is.
You can't say that her life isn't exciting. I do feel like a terrible old black sheep.
One critic said that if you're missing Downton Abbey, then this is just the thing for you. Straightforward question. Flattered by that or horrified by that?
Well, I don't feel horrified by anything particularly. I feel Mitford's tone, which I hope is the tone of the show, I think it's darker and more outrageous, in a way it's asking difficult questions. It's a very, even for now, she's asking quite radical questions about what it is to be a woman. And I think that Nancy was dealing with these issues in a way that is quite fearless, quite edgy.
Now, apart from being a great novelist, Nancy Mitford had a very, very wicked sense of humour. So if there's controversy about this, she would be cackling with delight in her grave, wouldn't she?
She was brave and fearless about being honest about things and funny, and she was allergic to earnestness. But she's a great political satirist too, and I do really feel that Nancy deserves to be seen as the kind of our female equivalent of Evelyn Waugh.
This novel's based on her own true family, her own real sisters, who are very polarised in terms of politics. A Hitler lover, a pro-fascist, pro-communists. Now, very different times now, but many families are still divided and polarised by politics. Does this make the story more relevant today?
Totally, yes. And I think that's why her voice is kind of welcome, because it sort of mocks extremist attitudes. And I feel that we're all prone to them at the moment, partly because of the internet and social media and this kind of moral certitude that everybody has about what's right and what's wrong. I don't know, we need a dose of people who are able to look at both sides and find them both as absurd and hilarious as each other, kind of.
Emily, thanks. I hope that very many people enjoy the series and that some are deeply offended too.
Yeah, me too, thank you.
And I'm joined now by the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab. Mr. Raab, let's start by talking about those restrictions. And I'm choosing my words very carefully. Are you sure that all legal restrictions will end on June the 21st?
Well, we've said that it will be evidence-driven. They won't end, if you're talking about the fourth step of the roadmap, they won't end before then, and we're going to be evidence-driven. But that's the aim. And I think the progress that we've made with the vaccine, over 34 million first doses have been dispensed, that's 60% of the adult population, on track to hit the end of July target. I think we're in a good position. But, we've got to keep tracking the variants and keep tracking the evidence.
Do you think it's safe now to replace the 10-day isolation with lateral flow tests?
Well, we haven't said that we're going to do that. What we're looking at is the process where, as we move forward, and it could be at the third step on the 17th of May, or it could be later, we'd like to see if the option worked of having daily tests for 7 days so that someone that doesn't have symptoms can get back to work or whatever it may be. So that's something we're looking at. Sure. It's got to be able to be done safely.
When are people watching this programme going to know which countries they can go on holiday to?
Well, we said that
later this week.
Well, we said that we'd make the changes on the 17th of May, and we'd set out the details of the new system, which is a traffic light system, before then. So it's coming shortly. Coming shortly.
All right. Are we planning to vaccinate school children?
It's not something we've made a decision on. What we are doing is we come through step 3 and step 4. And with the positive progress we've made, looking at what extra safeguards, caveats need to be put in place, and also looking at, once we've done cohorts 1 to 9, which are the adult population, the most vulnerable, what we might do then. Because we want to get to a position at the end of June where we can get life back as close to normal as possible, but there'll still need to be some safeguards in place. That's one of the tools that we'll look at, or one of the options that we'll look at, but no decision has been made.
What kind of safeguards will stay in place?
I don't want to prejudge it. It will. We'll look at the things in the round. It will be, particularly, I think it'll be around distancing. Maybe there'll be something around masks. But I don't really want to prejudge. Those are just some of the options.
Let me ask you about the really difficult political and moral choice I was talking to Lisa Nandy about. India desperately needs, specifically, vaccines right now to save people's lives.
Yeah.
We are about to vaccinate large numbers of people who, because of their age, are not seriously at risk from hospitalisation, still less death. Should we not be releasing those vaccines to help India now?
Well, look, we're talking with the Indians. I spoke to Jaishankar, Foreign Minister Jaishankar, about a week ago. I'm seeing him in person tomorrow. We'll always look very carefully at any requests we've got. We've provided them oxygen concentrators, ventilators, oxygen generators. In terms of vaccines, they have their contracted supply. I haven't had a request, I can tell you, on that specifically. What we are doing, obviously, we've invested in AstraZeneca. The research has provided a huge boon to the world because you have a safe, reliable vaccine which is globally in demand. We've also secured 1 billion doses via COVAX, which is, and this is really important, the international global mechanism for getting the vaccines to the poorest and most vulnerable. That's 1 billion doses the UK has secured. We're showing our leadership on the world stage with that.
But I come back to the very specific and very urgent question of vaccines in India.
Yes.
If you are asked for vaccines, and we must remember we've got 5 million on order, made in India, still in India,
yes.
Are we going to help the Indians or not?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on hypothetical scenarios, but I'm very closely engaged with Foreign Minister Jaishankar. The Indian relationship is very important to us, and we'd obviously want to cooperate very closely together. Right throughout this crisis, we've said we need to keep supply chains, particularly critical supply chains, open, and we ought to resolve these kind of issues through collaboration, and that is certainly what we're doing with the Indians.
All right, let's turn to something else. Northern Ireland, where politics is in a very parlous state, as we know at the moment. Back in 2018, Boris Johnson told the DUP conference, and I'm quoting him, regulatory checks and even customs controls between Great Britain and Northern Ireland would be damaging to the fabric of the Union. No British government could or should sign up to anything of the kind. Arlene Foster believed him. She was wrong to believe him, wasn't she?
No, the Prime Minister has done everything in his power, and we've delivered in the Northern Ireland Protocol an arrangement which should, depending on the way it's implemented, safeguard all of those equities. The issue that we've got at the moment, Andrew, is about the way and the manner with which it's delivered. So we, and through the Joint Committee and the work that Brandon Lewis and Lord Frost are doing, we want, and Michael Gove has been doing, we want to make sure we get a practical approach to some of these challenges which respects all sides. And at the moment, there is clearly an issue with it and a challenge with it. But what we're trying to do, the smart thing to do, the sensible thing to do, is work that through with the Europeans and the Irish through the Joint Committee.
But you, I mean, not you literally perhaps, but you as the government signed the protocol and the withdrawal agreement, which includes nearly 300 different regulations on Northern Ireland's behalf, which require checks of different kinds, 300 different kinds of regulation. I've got some of them here, but they require physical checks. So you must have known, as a government, there would have to be a border in the Irish Sea.
Well, no, because it also, the Northern Ireland Protocol also sets out that the integrity of the single market and in various different ways, trade facilitations between GB and Northern Ireland will be respected and promoted. And there's various chapters and sections on that. And the question that we've got to work through with our European partners and with with Ireland is the best way to make those work in practice. And we believe that there's a win-win here to remove that friction if you rely on the smart technology that we've got and you take a pragmatic approach. But we've got to see that pragmatic approach on both sides.
I'm just coming back to what you signed. Article 12 of the agreement you've been quoting says the authorities of the United Kingdom shall be responsible for implementing and applying provisions of EU law made applicable by this protocol to and in the United Kingdom in respect of Northern Ireland. We have signed up to EU law when it comes to those regulations. As I say, 300 regulations about everything from sausages to different kinds of animal and food and all the rest of it. We've signed it. We know there have to be checks.
Well, sorry, you've pointed to one set of sections.
It's an article that you've signed.
No, I know, but the way any contract or treaty works is that you've got a whole series of provisions. And what there are also is safeguard provisions to protect Northern Ireland within the customs area of the UK, to protect the trade between GB and Northern Ireland. And what we're saying is that those safeguards and the facilitations to ease the frictions, to have intelligence-led and smart checks, and they can be done digitally or otherwise, depends what we're talking about, those need to be worked. So you, with any deal, you have to look not just at the black letter provisions, and there'll be some that relate to the ones you've read out, but there are also others that talk about smoothing the trade between GB and Northern Ireland. And it's the way you deal with it in practice, the implementation that matters.
You talk about smoothing and those bits of the agreement. Article 6, which is one of those, talks about best endeavours. And that's what you're asking the EU to use, your best endeavours to make this as smooth as possible. But it says best endeavours in accordance with applicable legislation and taking into account the regulatory regimes of the EU. So again, we have agreed that those checks need to happen. And we promised, or you promised as the government, you promised to the government that there would be no checks. People in Northern Ireland heard the government, heard the Prime Minister saying no checks, and there are checks. That's why they're cross.
Well, there's a difference between having controls and having physical checks, and the balance that you have, for example, at the Port of Larne, just to give one example, between are you checking every consignment, or do you take an intelligence-led, which means that you check just some of them? There are already, and there have been previously, checks at the Port of Larne. So it's about the additional burden.
I don't want to interrupt you, but let's just remind ourselves what the Prime Minister said in the House of Commons about this when he was asked by Jeffrey Donaldson.
As we approach at the moment when we leave the European Union, the Prime Minister will be aware of concerns in Northern Ireland, and we welcome his assurance that there will continue to be unfettered access for Northern Ireland businesses to the UK single market. But does that commitment also apply to goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland?
Prime Minister.
Emphatically, Mr. Speaker, it does.
And the truth is, you have not delivered on that promise.
Well, as that shows, the scrutiny in the parliamentary debate that was clear at the time. There were different.
Sorry,
Andrew. No. There are tensions clearly in the Northern Ireland Protocol between protecting the integrity of the single market, which the Europeans want, and we understand that, and protecting the integrity of the market between GB and Northern Ireland. And the question is how that is reconciled in practice. And we've said, look, let's use all the technology at our disposals. Let's have a smart intelligence-led approach to these checks, which is done at most of the modern borders around the world, and take a pragmatic approach through the Northern Ireland Protocol Joint Committee. What we'd hoped, I think it's fair to say, and we still hope, is that as we turn the page on Brexit with our EU partners, they would take a similarly pragmatic approach, and that is still what we're striving for.
Nonetheless, people on the ground in Northern Ireland thought there were going to be checks. There are checks. And people were promised there wouldn't be checks. Jeffrey Donaldson says the Prime Minister needs to recognise that part of the problem is that unionists in Northern Ireland feel betrayed. They feel let down. They feel they have had something imposed upon them that runs contrary to the principles of consent at the heart of the Good Friday Agreement. That's how they feel.
Look, I resigned as Brexit Secretary precisely because I didn't think, as well as the backstop, that the Northern Ireland arrangements that we then went and were able to change in many material respects were good enough. I understand this.
And they're still not, are they?
Look, as I said, there has always been, written into the Northern Ireland Protocol, the tension between these two issues. One, the integrity of the single market rules. We understand the EU equities, and the other one, the integrity of the single market between Northern Ireland and Great Britain. The question really is, can we work together pragmatically in the Joint Committee to get a win-win? We're still pushing for that. I still believe it's achievable.
All right, let's turn to the issue of the Prime Minister's flat. Douglas Ross, leader of the Scottish Conservatives, just told me that if the Electoral Commission found that he had broken the law, he should resign. Do you agree with that?
The one thing I'm not going to do is speculate on what the outcome of the various different reviews are. The Prime Minister's been clear he covered the costs. He's been clear he's followed the codes of conduct. He's had official advice.
But obviously, if he's broken the law, he should resign. Obviously.
Why? Andrew, you're giving hypothetical speculation on 3 reviews. The reason that we've got those reviews is... no, hold on. The Prime Minister takes this very seriously. I think the right thing for me to do is respect the integrity of those reviews and let them run their course, rather than commenting about what may or may not be found at the end of them.
Well, Douglas Ross can answer it.
He'd take decisions...
All right, let me ask you an even simpler question. Do you have complete faith in the Electoral Commission?
Look, I think it's a complete faith. Look, I trust it to look at these things the right way.
Yeah. You do trust it? OK, that's good, that's important. Let's turn to Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, one of the really big things. Is she being held a hostage?
Look, I think it's very difficult to argue against that characterisation. I've said that before in the House of Commons.
So you think she is being held a hostage?
So first of all, I spoke to Nazanin on Wednesday. We managed last year to secure her release on furlough. We've worked very hard to make sure that the ankle tag is removed so she can go outside of her parents' home. And obviously I'm putting a huge amount of effort into securing her release and her return to her loved ones, particularly Richard and Gabriella. It is clear that she's subjected to a cat and mouse game that the Iranians, or certainly a part of the Iranian system, engage with, and they try and use her for leverage on the United Kingdom and the rest of the international community.
Which means that she is a hostage. Does the British government believe that she is being held as a hostage?
I think it's very difficult to argue against that characterisation.
I mean, the reason I'm asking, as you know, I'm sure, is that her husband, Richard, and the Foreign Affairs Select Committee say that what's going on in Iran is a widespread practice of taking people effectively hostage for diplomatic and commercial reasons, and that we have to call this out as a government and describe it for what it is.
Well, I think that's right at one level. I would just say my job, and we've got a wider context which is linked, which is the JCPOA negotiations. We're working with the US and the other powers to get Iran back to full compliance. And if you like, the leverage that the Iranians try and use through detainees, including Nazanin and our other Iranian British dual nationals, is clearly that takes place. I'm also going to be very careful in those very sensitive, delicate negotiations that I don't do anything which is counterproductive to the goal of securing her release as soon as possible. And indeed, I should say, the release of the other dual nationals that we have in Evin Prison.
So in terms of Britain, this all goes back to a debt for tanks under the Shah, £400 million. International courts have agreed that we actually owe that money. That's what all this is about. Why can't we just pay the money?
It's not solely about that. And, of course,
but it would help a lot if we paid it.
Well, look, we've said, and look, be very clear, that debt is something that we want to have resolved, and we are committed to resolution. That is not actually the thing that is holding this up at the moment. It is the wider context as we come up to the Iranian presidential elections and the wider negotiations on the JCPOA, which inevitably from the Iranian perspective, the two are considered in tandem. But let's also be clear about something else. Nazanin is held unlawfully, in my view, as a matter of international law. I think she's been treated in the most abusive, torturous way. I think it amounts to torture the way she's been treated. And there is a very clear, unequivocal obligation on the Iranians to release her and all of those who are being held as leverage immediately and without condition. And we call on Iran to step up and comply with its obligations.
You're cutting the British contribution to UNICEF by 60%. Why?
Look, we've had to make some very difficult decisions because of the impact of COVID. We've got the biggest hit in our economy, contraction of our economy in 300 years, budget deficit, double what we saw in the 2008 and 9 financial crisis. But let's also
do you accept this? Sorry, do you accept this particular cut is going to hit some of the poorest people in the world, children who are in desperate need of clean water, education and much else?
The individual programme budgets that you're speculating, and I've seen various comments in the newspaper, have not been firmed up yet. What I would say is we're still putting in £10 billion, taxpayers' money, government money, this year. We're the third biggest G7 global donor as a proportion of GDP. And in terms of public health, which is what you're talking about, 1.3 billion going in this year. So we're doing a huge amount. But inevitably, Andrew, viewers would be very surprised, given the financial and economic hit, if we weren't looking in the round, not just at domestic departments for savings, but also at our aid budget.
But also, these are things that we promised around the world. This is about our reputation in the world and some of the world's poorest people. We promised this money and we're not delivering.
No, there's nothing that we have legally committed to or made a formal commitment. We're keeping all of those that we're not following through on. We're committing all of those obligations. Just on the UNICEF one, because we've had this has been raised with me. We just remind people of the positives here. We, of course, invested in the AstraZeneca vaccine. Countries around the world are benefiting from that investment in the R&D. We've secured 1 billion doses for COVAX. This is the UK contribution alone, which is going to the most vulnerable countries around the world. Inevitably, our global public health spend has been diverted to deal with the pandemic. And, of course, we've got the financial pressures that, of course, every country is going through.
All right. Dominic Raab, thanks very much indeed for coming in and talking to us. And let's return now to Plaid Cymru's leader, Adam Price. Adam Price, I hope you can hear me this time.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Andrew, yeah, we often struggle in Wales to make our voice heard, but thanks for coming to us.
You can be heard right now. And my first question to you was and is whether you accept that a policy of Welsh independence from England and membership of the EU, which is your policy, does mean a hard border down the Welsh-English border.
Well, no, we set out in our Independence Commission report a 200-page document that we published just before Christmas that our medium-term objective would be for an independent Wales to become members of the European Free Trade Association, the so-called Norway solution that we became very familiar with, didn't we, during the Brexit debate, which does provide us, Andrew, with that more frictionless access than we currently enjoy to the European single market, but it would also give us the flexibility and the autonomy to be able to maintain a single market on this island as well.
Well, it may be 200 pages, and I'm sure it's very interesting, but
nobody... You mean you haven't read it, Andrew?
Not quite yet. It'll be on my reading list this evening, I'm sure.
Simon Jenkins yesterday compared it to the Federalist Papers, of course, that you'll know.
All right. Well, it must be... Listen, Adam Price, it must be very, very clever if you're going to persuade the EU to do something that absolutely nobody else in the world has been able to do, which is to operate the single market with an open border to a non-single market country, which would be England in this case.
No, Andrew, as I just mentioned to you, our policy is actually to be members of the European Free Trade Association, which does allow that greater flexibility. That would be outside of the...
So you wouldn't join the EU?
No, that would not be... We are a pro-European party, and it would, as a party, it would be our longer-term aspiration. But we accept, for the medium term, for the foreseeable future, the best solution for Wales would be to be members of EFTA.
Let's turn to the economics of all of this. The Institute for Government, a highly respected body, says Wales is the recipient of considerable sums from elsewhere in the UK. Increased taxes would be unavoidable if an independent Wales were to target current levels of spending. Are they wrong?
Well, they're right to point to the fiscal gap, of course. The fact is, and that's a function, by the way, of the fact that the Welsh economy has not been able to realise its potential for generations. And as a result of that, of course, you get, if the economy is underperforming, you don't generate the tax revenue that you would if you were to realise our potential. But our positive message is that Wales has great economic potential. The problem is, Andrew, is that we've been locked in this unequal United Kingdom, which concentrates wealth in one corner of the UK. It's a problem for us in Wales. It's a problem, by the way, for parts of the north of England. And we'd see now, of course, there's even a movement for independence there. And who can blame them?
Well, you say it's unequal, and many English voters might agree with that, because, again, from the Institute of Government figures, in 2018 to 19, the UK government spent £12,800 per person in England compared to £14,000 per person in Wales. That's a 9% gap, and that means independence would require either spending cuts or tax increases. Very straightforward question. Which is it?
No. What independence requires, and indeed what Wales requires, Andrew, is to put us on a different economic trajectory. Rather than accepting a situation where almost 1 in 3 of our children are living in poverty in the 21st century, that is the bitter legacy from the Westminster government, which has never invested sufficiently in our communities. We're not asking for charity, by the way. We're asking for a fair share of investment in infrastructure. Most of the infrastructure investment has been concentrated in not already affluent southeast corner of the United Kingdom. Is it any wonder, therefore, Andrew, that we're not able to realise our potential in this unequal United Kingdom?
I noticed in the debate between Welsh leaders that you are noticeably friendly to Mark Drakeford, the Labour leader. If, as a result of this election, you have to go in, or you want to go into coalition with Labour in Wales, what is your price for that? Is your price a referendum, or is it something else?
Well, we do politics slightly differently here in Wales. We can maintain friendly and cordial relations, even between leaders of different political parties. But we've been absolutely clear, Andrew, that Wales needs to be put on a different path. We've had 22 years of a Labour-led administration, and sadly, particularly on the economy, we haven't seen the progress that we need in our communities, and we'll only get that if we embrace political change, which will then unlock the social and economic change that we require.
Adam Price, thanks so much for staying on doggedly despite our technical difficulties. Much appreciated. And thanks indeed to all my guests and, of course, to you for watching. I will be in Glasgow next Sunday as we watch the final election results roll in. Join me then at 9 o'clock. Goodbye.